You know your church needs to go through a revitalization process, but you're not sure how to get started. Today on the Church Revitalization Podcast, we have a pre-revitalization checklist for you. Stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I am joined by AJ Matthew. We are glad to see you today on the Church Revitalization Podcast. Today, we're brought to you by our friends at Faith Street. Faith Street is an iOS and Android app that you can use to help build community from Sunday to Sunday by prompting mindfulness and discussion about your teaching and generosity and prayer requests and just connecting your people together so that discipleship becomes a habit. It's a tool developed by church leaders for churches. It's a great tool for you to check out, see if it's a good fit for you and your church community. Church Revitalization Podcast listeners get 20% off the service. So check out Faith Street. I was about to say malphursgroup.com, and that's not it. You want to go to faithstreet.com/Malphurs, FAITHSTREET.com/Malphurs, MALPHURS, 20% off. All right, AJ, you want to get started in revitalization, but you're really not sure what are my first steps.
Yeah.
Like what do I do? You can't just jump straight into it. There's some work that needs to be done. And it's not a crazy question to go, what are the first things that I should do if I'm considering this? And a lot of churches coming out of the pandemic have this on their mind going, okay, we've got to rethink church.
Yeah.
What are we going to be? What's it going to look like? And so I'm excited about this today, kind of walk folks through what your initial steps ought to be.
Yeah, right. It's I think, it's always helpful to have things to think through on the front end of anything. It's a serious task to take on a revitalization process. You don't want to just jump into it not knowing how to set yourself up for success. Today's article has a little airline analogy at the beginning, but I went flying last week with my teenage son who wants to be a pilot. And the flight instructor did a pre-flight checklist, and I'm thankful
you were in the plane with him.
I was, yeah.
Oh my goodness! How have we not talked about this? No, I would be like the mom who's sitting in the passenger seat, who's always pretending to. I'd be like, how do you not backseat? Is it, what do you call that? Backseat flying?
Backseat flying, yeah. I was in the backseat, and my 7-year-old son. I wasn't really nervous. I mean, I knew there was a trained pilot.
Did it cross your mind, if this plane goes down, now my wife not only would lose a child, but also a husband?
I guess I had confidence in the equipment. I had confidence in the trained pilot next to my son. And
wait. And you had confidence in the pre-flight checklist.
Pre-flight checklist. Yeah. I was a little surprised when she was like, "Oh, you've flown once before a year ago? I'll let you do everything." And so he taxied, he took off, he flew, he landed the plane, and I was sitting there going, how does my kid know how to do this so well? I can't believe my son just did that stuff. All right, so that's a whole other episode. If you want to talk about flying, email me. We'll talk about flying.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Leadership@malphursgroup.com. It'll get to 8.
There you go. Let's talk about pre-revitalization checklist for churches, since this is a podcast about helping churches, not flying airplanes.
I think people don't mind hearing a little bit of your life.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, let's do it. Hit me up.
Or if they turned it off, we don't know. So
right. This is our worst listened to episode ever. We'll go, all right, we got to stick with church topics.
We got to stick to
people came here to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe this will get edited out. Maybe it won't.
It won't. It definitely won't.
Enjoy the ride. Number 1, clarify the leader of the church revitalization process. So maybe that's you. Maybe that's not going to be you for whoever's listening today. But somebody's got to be in charge. That doesn't mean that somebody is the person that does everything, because church revitalization is a team sport. And
Yep.
but it does need somebody that's like at least paying attention to when are we going to meet? Who's going to be on the team? What's the next thing that we need to do? Do I need to make copies? There's lots of things, and somebody's got to take responsibility for that.
Yep.
Yeah, will that be
It's
you?
usually the senior pastor, but
Yeah.
it's not always the senior pastor. And in fact, a question that we get regularly, churches that are in between pastors, they'll say, well, do we need to wait for a pastor? Because shouldn't the pastor lead this process? And our answer to that is almost always no. You should not wait. You should do it now, because you're going to make a much better hire after you've gone through some of this revitalization work than if you were to hire someone. And it's just, so all that to say, it doesn't have to be the senior pastor. It usually is, but sometimes the senior pastor is overloaded, AJ, and so they can't take on one more thing, or there's a someone else on the staff who's better equipped, or there's a guy on the board who's retired who has some experience in change management. So you just never know. But someone, to your point, AJ, someone has to be the point person for the process. Doesn't mean they're going to do all the work. It's just they're the coordinator of the process.
Yeah, right. So, yep. So that's kind of a simple one, but yeah, certainly keep that in mind that if your church is in between pastors, that has become more and more common with us, hasn't it, Scott? We've had a lot of that.
Yeah.
And that works well. All right. Number 2, clarify what you're doing. So you need to sort of set the stage for what is this process even going to be like, right?
What's the scope of work? Yeah, so it's helpful if you're using a process like strategic envisioning. We have 5 key questions that we walk through. What is our mandate? What motivates us? How are we going to structure ministry? Where are we going? And what are we going to do this year? So you can steal those 5 questions from us if you'd like, but that's the mission question, the values question, the discipleship pathway question, the vision question, and the strategy question. So you ask these 5 questions. And so that kind of defines, AJ, a scope of work. It defines what the kinds of things that you're going to talk about, the kinds of things you're not going to talk about. Because the reality is, if you don't clarify the scope of work on the front end, you'll get stuck on all kinds of tangents. And it's not going to be helpful, and you'll never get anything done. So start on the front end, figuring out what is it that we are going to do? What are we not going to do? Yeah.
And that's helpful, especially for you congregational churches that need to like get everybody on board.
You got to get somebody to vote. Yeah.
So establishing, because we work with leadership teams. We call it an SLT, a strategic leadership team. And so going to assemble a group of people in the church to do this.
Hey, don't jump ahead. You're on to point 4.
Okay. But having a scope of work is helpful whenever you need to ask permission from a group of people who might be saying, wait a minute, but what are you going to do? Are you going to do this or that? Or, and you can say, nope, here's what we're going to do.
That's right.
All right. Number 3, determine the church's current health. So you would have a hard time identifying what you need to do next if you don't know where you're starting from, right? Or where are we going if we don't know where we are today? So we definitely help with that. Any church that we work with, we've got our church ministry analysis that can help figure out where we're starting from, maybe some areas that need more attention than others. But determining your current health is really important to determining what your future health will look like and the shape that it'll take and the path to get there.
Yeah. Imagine a doctor prescribing you medicine without ever actually doing any sort of diagnostics or examination on you. That would be illegal, probably. I'm going to guess. That doctor wouldn't be a doctor for very long.
Call them drug dealers. Not doctors.
That's true. But it's it's leadership malpractice to go into a revitalization process without really understanding where you're starting from. And you can't assume that you know. Your intuition about your church's health is not enough. You need real data, and not just the above the waterline, the tip of the iceberg stuff that you can see. What our attendance numbers are, what the giving numbers are. I know that you know those things, but what's driving those things? You need to know that. And so you need an assessment. It doesn't have to be the church ministry analysis by the Malfers Group, although it's $99. So it's a steal. But you could use someone else. You could find some other tool.
Yeah.
We are pitching our thing, but also more than that, we're pitching the idea of go through an assessment.
Right. Yeah. All right. Now, finally, number 4, clarify who will participate. So we call this a strategic leadership team, or SLT. And so this is for the way we handle churches, this team are what we just have always referred to as known leaders in the church. It's going to vary depending on how what your church's polity is, the size of your church. If your church truly is run by, paid ministry staff, then we need to have this team be more paid ministry staff. If you're a smaller church and you're just your ministries are led by lay leaders, then we need lay leaders on the team. It's always going to be some kind of a blend, board members, staff, lay leaders. But it's a team that knows the church. It's going to be people that are participating in the ministry. They're serving in various capacities, and they're going to be able to answer tough questions about the church and strategize on how to make improvements where needed.
Yeah, I often will meet with pastors and I'll kind of lay out what it is that we do in terms of strategic envisioning, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I've got a vision statement that I've written, or I've got a discipleship pathway that I've scribbled on a piece of paper or something." I go, "Okay, well, that's great. I'm thrilled that you're excited about the prospect, right?" But I'll always follow that up with, who helped you craft that?
Yeah.
And if they say, "Well, I sat down in my office and I wrote it," that's not good enough. People are far more likely to advocate for a change that they had a voice in crafting. And so if you, as the pastor, you've written a vision statement all on your own, you've made some decisions about how you're going to structure ministry and discipleship pathway, that's not going to work. That's not a revitalization process. That's revitalization by decree. And that is not going to go very far. So if you're going to do a revitalization process, you need a team. And it's usually 12 to 15 people. Like AJ said, who's on that team is going to vary from church to church, but it's always a team process. It is a team sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next point, number 5, is set expectations for the process. So that team needs to know what they're getting into. And just everybody needs to have this clarity, including the entire church, because there will certainly be people that would go, "All right, you guys just met. Did you figure everything out? And what's, and the answer is no, we didn't figure it all out. It takes a little bit of time." So, the way should we talk about the way our process is laid out, Scott?
I think I wrote it. I think in the article, I talk about how we have 3 phases. Okay. So let's just walk through.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of those 3 phases. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Allow me.
Did you tell me? Did you tell me to go ahead?
I just said, go ahead. Never mind. I'll do it myself. So
do it yourself. I'm looking something up. You do that while I'm looking.
Okay. I'm sure you're on tap for the next book recommendation here on the Church Revitalization 100%. So we start off, well, we just said in the previous point, church ministry analysis is on the front end, developing the team. And then we've got, we go through a short training process so that everybody on the strategic leadership team is raised up to the same level on terminology, on understanding of concepts. And there's some, great discussion and everything that happens during that process as well. But so training, there's a training aspect to the process. Second phase of the process is—
Hold on. That's just where I want to make a comment.
Oh,
This is
Scott, jump in now.
Let me hop in. Hold on. Don't move on too fast.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to touch on why the training phase. Don't skip over this. You might think, "Oh, that's not important." It doesn't matter. Yeah. So I am reading from a book. This is a great one called Sticky Teams, which I think we may do another episode in the future touching on some stuff from this book. But he talks about, Larry Osborne talks about how most boards and staffs suffer from some degree of what he calls educational separation. It's an organizational disease that occurs when a leader has significantly more education and training than everyone else. This results in differing perspectives and dueling paradigms, which can quickly turn constructive debate into irreconcilable differences. At its worst, this dynamic produces arrogant pastors and distrusting lay leaders.
Yep.
So it's the whole reason why we do it. A pastor, when we talk through, well, here's what we do in the training, very often I can see it in their eyes. They think, I already know that stuff. And my point is always, it's not about you. The training, I mean, they probably learned things that they didn't know too, but it's not for them. It's for the lay leaders who have never thought about these things before. So don't skip over the training phase, because you're going to have much better planning if everyone is operating from the same level of competency on the issues that surround church health.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's my point there.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Nope. Great point. So that whenever we move into the next phase, the planning phase, which is an intense weekend of workshops, the team is ready to work. Everybody's operating from the same point of view, and we then as guides can simply guide the team into making decisions about critical health areas for the church. After that, it's developing the implementation plan and getting started. So we're talking 2-3 months up to that point in the process, and then moving on through the implementation phase, which is never ending. You're always implementing something new, because every year you'd be refreshing what the previous work that you had done and figuring out your next move.
But initially you're talking about a 12-month commitment. So in your first, your revitalization team, there's usually a transition over time from kind of the ad hoc group you put together into something that's more sustainable long-term. But in that ad hoc group, you're asking for a 1-year commitment from the end of planning. So 12 months of implementation. So just to be clear, yes, implementation generally kind of moves on. In fact, we had an episode a few weeks ago, AJ, maybe, about like planning rhythms.
Yeah.
You might want to go back and look at that and see how implementation fits into that. But as a general rule, you're asking for a 1-year commitment from this first strategic leadership team ad hoc group you put together.
Yeah. Okay. Our sixth and final point today is kind of a segue in from the previous point as well. Prepare yourself and your team for change. And the training certainly is helpful for that as well. But even before, the team gets to that, the point of the process, the point of a revitalization process is change in the church. If that's not understood from the very beginning, then you're going to have problems. So status quo gets status quo results. And in last week's episode, we just talked about churches dying a slow death. And you've talked before, Scott, also about the myth of the status quo. There truly is no such thing. It might be the perception of the status quo, but truly the church is really just on a slow death decline. But moving towards positive change is what a revitalization process would be all about. We need to stop doing what we're doing, because we're going to keep getting the same results. If we want different and positive and impactful results, then we have to change. And so that's got to be an expectation set from the beginning. Yeah,
you've got to be prepared for squeaky wheels to squeak, and you can't let external opposition to change, which is inevitable. You can't allow that to derail your whole process. I absolutely love in the book of Nehemiah, where you've got Sanballat comes in after it. Nehemiah's kind of laid out the plan. Here's the plan. Here's the plan for change. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how everyone's going to have their part in the process. Then Sanballat comes, who's an outsider, but he's a hanger-on, right? He's there a lot. He hangs around a lot. He says, well, what are you doing? Why'd you get this in your brain? Are you opposing the king? Basically suggesting that he's doing something evil or wrong. And there are going to be people in your church, quite honestly, who have the same attitude. Are you doing something unholy? Are you doing something evil? This sounds like a business thing. You're going to get these kinds of pieces of pushback when it comes to change. And I love how Nehemiah's response to this is essentially get on the bus or get out. He says, you have no portion, you have no right in this plan. here's what God has called us to do, and we're going to do it. And you very much have to take that same approach. Recognize that not every person who has a question is opposing you. Start with the assumption that a person simply doesn't understand, and they can be coached. Mm-hmm. That's another mistake, right? Is just kind of shooting from the hip and thinking that everybody who has a question is like trying to derail you. And that's just not the case.
Yeah.
But be able to discern the difference between someone who's just negative and someone who can be coached along.
Yeah, right. It takes good communication. That's not on our pre-revitalization checklist, but communicating well with the entire church as you're preparing and going through the process. That would be your bonus point number 7. One of the ways you could do that would be through the Faith Street app. If you have your church connected, you could certainly communicate.
You got me.
Revitalization process. You didn't see that coming?
I did see it coming. I was wondering, wait, is he setting up a plug, or is this a legitimate point he's making? I mean, it is a legitimate point you're making. If you've been listening to the podcast, friends, for the last several weeks, AJ is getting the best of me in setting up these end of the podcast plugs for Faith Street, our wonderful sponsor. They create an iOS and Android app that helps to build a sense of community and discipleship as a habit between Sundays. And listeners to the podcast get 20% off, AJ, if they go to faithstreet.com/Malfers. Do you know how to spell that?
faithstreet.com/MALPHURS.
Nicely done. Yes, I hope you don't mind us, dear listeners and viewers, having a bit of fun, trying to get the final segue in for our plug for our friends at Faith Street.
Pretty fun to talk about the sponsor at the end. Thanks.
It's fun for us. Is it fun for our listeners? I don't know. It's fun for us.
People tune in, they're like, I'm only listening to the last 15 seconds when they try to.
They're tapping the 15-second skip button when they get to that. Yeah.
Sincere thanks, though, to Faith Street. I mean, sincerely, hey guys, if y'all are listening, we thank you for helping make the Church Revitalization Podcast possible, because we love to do this, and so we're happy that you guys want to be a part of it. This has been episode 91, so you could go over to mouthversegroup.com/91 and read today's article. We always have kind of expansion of our points and a lot less silliness and banter in the written word than in the spoken word.
You can see that as a pro or a con.
And you can also go over, if you're listening, this is on YouTube as well. So if you want to get a visual of today's comedy, you can see it over there at
yes.
YouTube.
Otherwise, if you want to see how dashing AJ and I look in real life, see if the sound of our voice matches what you thought. Actually, sorry, I know we're wrapping up, but AJ worked with a church a couple of years ago that I ended up working with to do some follow-up work with later. And I'm not going to say who or whatever, because I don't want to. But at any rate, I had only known this person just through AJ talking about this person. I never actually met them until much later. And in my mind, this person was like 35 or 40 years old for some reason. And then I met them in their 60s, and I was surprised. So if you've only ever listened, I would genuinely be curious if you hop online, go to YouTube, find us, do our faces match the voice, like your self-conception of us?
There you go. Comment on YouTube. Do we look like our voices, or do we not look like our voices?
It's a good question.
Like, share, subscribe.
We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.